on rising gas prices and the collapse of energy supplies.
Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I came before the House on Monday to update colleagues on the action we're taking and appeared before the Base Select Committee yesterday to discuss the matter in greater depth. The government has been clear that protecting consumers is our primary focus and shapes our entire approach to this issue. We will continue to protect consumers with the energy price cap. The global gas situation, Mr. Speaker, has had an impact on some energy suppliers, and I have been in touch daily with Ofgem, and as they set out yesterday, there are more than 50 suppliers in the domestic market, and we may unfortunately see more suppliers exit the market in the coming weeks. But it is not unusual for energy suppliers to leave the market for various reasons, particularly when wholesale global prices are rising. Ofgem and government have clear, well-rehearsed processes in place to make sure that all customers are supplied with energy. Our approach will be informed by the following principles: protecting customers, especially vulnerable ones, from price spikes. And the solution to this crisis will be found from the industry and the market, as is already happening. And government, I repeat, will not be bailing out failed energy companies. Lastly, we would like to see a competitive energy market which can deliver choice and lower prices. The energy price cap, which continues to protect millions of customers, will remain in place. And very finally, consumers, Mr. Speaker, come first. And this has always been the centerpiece of our approach.
On Monday, I said to the Secretary of State that he was being far too complacent about the situation we are facing. Events since have unfortunately borne this out. Complacent about the crisis in the market, complacent about the impact on families, complacent about the cost of living crisis. He pretended on Monday and again today that it was normal for a number of suppliers to go down each winter. But what we are dealing with is far from normal, Mr. Speaker. 800,000 customers losing their suppliers yesterday alone, 1.5 million in the last 6 weeks. So will he now answer the question he has so far failed to answer? Does he believe taxpayers' money will be necessary to stabilise the market? If so, how will he ensure value for money and that we do not simply end up with greater concentration of the big six suppliers? Next, Mr. Speaker, I have a letter here that Ofgem wrote to him when he was the Energy Minister 18 months ago during COVID, warning, and I quote, about systemic risk to the energy supply sector as a whole. It said the usual Ofgem mechanism, the supplier of last resort, may not be possible. And it went on, the failure of medium and large suppliers would need to be handled via a special administration regime, placing significant burden and costs on government. So will he answer the question of what planning was done for this eventuality following that letter? Surely government should have been in a position now to know exactly what needs to be done where there is systemic risk to suppliers, and haven't they left the country dangerously exposed with them scrabbling around for solutions? Finally, Mr. Speaker, we are 7 days from the cut to universal credit. This is the last time a government minister will be in the House explaining to millions of families why it's plunging them further into fuel poverty. Instead of warm words or platitudes, can he now tell the British people how he can possibly justify this attack on their living standards? Isn't the truth there can be no defence for it, and the only right, proper and fair thing to do is to cancel the cut?
Secretary of State.
Obviously, as usual, number of issues that he raised. We haven't been complacent. The whole point about the supply of last resort process, which was interrogated last year, is that it's an organised process, well established, which can allow existing strong companies to absorb customers in failure. And if he would desist from chanting from a central position, you might actually hear my answer. And we have to make, I remember the letter last year. We interrogated all through the COVID process the systems that we had in place. And during that period, the supply of last resort was found to work. So far this year, it has been found to work. So I'm not going to try and talk ourselves to exacerbate the crisis. With regard to the special administration regime, that's something that's in place. Thankfully, we haven't had to use that, but he knows as well as many people in this House that it is there should the case arise. With respect to universal credit, I'll say what I said earlier in the week. That is a matter across government in terms of the budget, in terms of budgetary responsibility. There will be a budget at the end of October, and there will be plenty of time to discuss that then.
Speaker, can I just press the Business Secretary a little on the government assumptions about pricing? So, in his evidence to the Business Select Committee yesterday, the head of Ofgem appeared to suggest that he expected these high prices to continue for some time. Now, I accept that the government doesn't have a crystal ball, but in making policy choices, the government must be making some assumptions about what it thinks is the most likely path for prices. Can the Business Secretary set those out for the House, please?
Admittedly, I don't have a crystal ball, as my right honourable friend has suggested. I don't make predictions about the price, but clearly we prepare for every eventuality. And I think the biggest help for consumers and customers at this current time is the price cap, the energy price cap, which I've repeatedly stated is staying in place.
Alan Brown.
This isn't market failure, it's government and regulator failure. Now, Ofgem all along had the financial and hedging information to know what companies were at risk, so why are we now in crisis management phase? Mr Speaker, the Tories promised us cheaper energy bills post-Brexit, but right now electricity wholesale prices in the UK are the highest in the whole of Europe. But meanwhile, as gas prices increase, the Treasury gets extra VAT receipts and increased oil and gas revenues. So surely, Mr Speaker, there must be a redistribution of this increased Treasury income to help hard-pressed bill payers. At the moment, it's these bill payers that cover the additional costs of transferring customers to other energy suppliers. They cover the credit of customers with failed companies and then have to pay increased tariffs when transferred. The cap might stay, but the cap doesn't stop energy bills going up. So why should bill payers pay even more money when Treasury is getting increased revenue out of this? So what is the additional estimated cost for bill payers? Mr Speaker, also a quarter of our electricity bills consist of levies. So as we move away from a reliance on fossil fuels, we need a fundamental shift in how that transition is paid for, and that's something the Treasury needs to address as well. This means ending the grid charging regime so that Scotland doesn't have the highest charges in Europe, and it means giving the go-ahead for pumped hydro storage and waving tidal. Finally, is the Secretary of State happy to sit by while this cost of living crisis is ongoing? Is he happy to plunge 500,000 extra people into fuel poverty, or will he fight with the Treasury to end the universal cut and release extra money to help hard-pressed bill payers?
Secretary.
Clearly, there was a lot in that question and statement. I'll deal with a couple of things, if I may. I'll deal with a couple of issues, if I may. With respect to universal credit and wider budgetary considerations, I've repeatedly said that is something for my right honourable friend, the Chancellor. We will have ample opportunity to discuss these things in the House. With respect to the move away from fossil fuels, he and I are in agreement. I think that we need a diverse supply of decarbonised sources of energy. And finally, I dispute the fact that we are ill-prepared. We have the solar process in place. We've got the SAR process. We stress-tested those during the whole of the COVID period, where I was in constant contact with the industry. And I feel so far we have managed to accommodate such supplier failures we've seen with existing structures.
Thank you, Mr.
Speaker. Can my right honourable friend confirm that the cold winter payment scheme will remain in place?
Again, further budgetary issues, but I have always said that we are absolutely focused on customers, and particularly the most vulnerable customers. So the warm home discount is something that we are staying, and we are looking to secure protect the most vulnerable customers, particularly prepaid customers, from the worst effects of the energy price spike.
Stephanie Peacock.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. On Monday, the Secretary of State dismissed our lack of gas storage as not relevant. It has clearly left us vulnerable. So will he now admit that the closure of the Rough storage facility was a mistake?
I don't think it's relevant, because there's no way that any storage in the world is going to mitigate the effect of a quadrupling in the gas price in 4 months, as we've seen. And the answer to this is actually getting more diverse sources of supply, more diverse sources of electricity through non-carbon sources. through nuclear, which I'm still very unclear as to what the opposition party's view is on nuclear, and through other sources of decarbonised energy.
Sir Christopher Cho.
Mr. Speaker, why don't we reduce VAT on fuel as a temporary measure? We did it for the hospitality industry, which was badly affected by COVID-19. Why don't we abolish VAT for consumers on fuel now?
My honourable friend is quite right. We did a whole range of interventions in terms of to alleviate the burden on consumers and also on businesses. And these were fiscal interventions that my right honourable friend, the Chancellor, pursued last year. And I'm sure that he is looking at all sorts of a range of things this year. But that's a matter for him to decide ahead of the budget.
Alistair Carmichael.
What are the implications of this situation for the exploitation and extraction of gas within the UK continental shelf?
The right honourable member will know that as far as 2020 was concerned, 50%, 48% in fact, of our natural gas came from the UK continental shelf. So that's clearly a strong, sustainable source of gas into this country. However, I would suggest to him that gas, I think, is a transition fuel. It's something where we, in our pursuit of net zero by 2050, that's something which we want to transition away from. And that's why we're developing carbon capture and also hydrogen, as he knows very well.
Robert Halfon.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Further to the question from my one friend for Christchurch. I raised this the other day. Surely the Conservative answer to this is to reduce VAT on energy bills, something that was pledged by those who supported Brexit in the EU referendum. And I know my honourable friend will say the Treasury, it's up to the Treasury to decide, but he is very persuasive. He is a tax-cutting Conservative, and he believes in tax cuts. And I know that if he went to see the Chancellor, he would ensure that we would get VAT cut on energy bills.
Well done. As my right honourable friend knows, I see my right honourable friend, the Chancellor, on a regular basis. I'm delighted to inform him that those conversations tend to be confidential.
Matt Weston.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The UK suffers higher energy costs for both consumers and our businesses, our industries. Why is it then, as to follow the point from my honourable friend, the member for Barnsley, that the storage capacity in the UK is just 2% of annual demand versus 25% in Europe? As an added reason, we don't have energy price resilience.
Only yesterday, there was a conference of EU energy ministers to discuss this very problem. It is not a function of storage to be able to mitigate a quadrupling of the gas price. This is it's complete red herring. And one of the reasons why we have less storage is because we've got a greater diversity of energy supply. That's a strength, not a weakness.
John Penrose.
The Secretary of State is absolutely right to focus on consumers and to not try and bail out energy firms that have got things wrong or are too fragile. But would he please explain to us how he's dealing with customers who are currently with suppliers that can go bust, who are on capped tariffs? Is he encountering any resistance from the firms that are being asked to take on those customers, who may therefore be arriving at a loss to the acquiring firm? Is he seeing any resistance from them to transfer those customers?
Look, as I've said, we've got a supplier of last resort process which has worked well in the last couple of years. It's not my job to say what the terms on which customers are absorbed by other companies. However, no, not ahead of the process. However, we feel that ultimately, actually, the price cap, most of these prices are at or just below the price cap. And that is actually fundamentally what is going to protect consumers in this period.
Thank
you, Mr. Speaker. This government is responsible for families facing a cost of living crisis due to a triple whammy of rising gas prices, looming tax rises and cuts to universal credit. Will the Minister finally acknowledge and accept that this is completely and utterly immoral to cut universal credit?
What I do acknowledge is that there's been a quadrupling of the gas price and that we have an energy price cap which will protect customers from those spikes. And we also have schemes like the Warm Home Discount, which will protect the most vulnerable customers. That's what I acknowledge.
Alexander Stafford.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. What assessment has my right honourable friend made on the structural dependency this country has on gas created by the last Labour government as a result of sidelining green technologies like nuclear and even hydrogen?
My honourable friend is absolutely right. If you take the example of nuclear power, the last Labour government did absolutely nothing to drive nuclear power, and of course nuclear power is a fundamental ingredient of a security of energy supply.
Thomas Shapland.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The figure of £139 a year has been floated in the press as being the effect of the increase in the energy price cap this year. But of course, that refers only to the variable rate. It doesn't take into account the changes in bills that people will face if they move from one tariff to another, often against their will in current circumstances. So will the Secretary of State consider asking the regulator to direct energy suppliers to limit the price increase to any individual customer to a reasonable amount over the coming year?
I've said we've got a supplier of last resort process, and it would be wrong of me here at the dispatch box to interfere in how that works. It's worked effectively over the last 2 years. As I've said to this House repeatedly, the energy price cap does give some succor, because you could imagine without the energy price cap, a lot of these consumer prices would be exorbitant. So the energy price cap does give support, and on the vulnerable end of the market, we continue to support the warm home discount.
Will be worried that if their energy supply does go bust, they potentially could be cut off from their gas and electricity. Could the Secretary of State explain in straightforward, understandable terms how the supplier of last resort process works to put customers' minds at rest?
So what happens, and it's happening at the moment, is that there's essentially a bidding process for the customers of the exiting, the failing companies, and the cost of absorbing those customers is taken on by the company that wins the bid, and also across the industry at large. So these costs are mutualized, but generally it has been seen that there's always continuity of supply, and that's a key element of the system.
John Speller.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The Minister clearly believes that the invisible hand of the market will solve all this without him doing anything. But when he talks about customers, does he only mean domestic consumers, or will he ensure supply to keep industry going and secure jobs? And in that context, does he think it's acceptable that Germany has some 90 days of gas storage and we only have nine days worth? Will he also commit to ensuring adequate supplies under our control for the future by licensing new gas fields?
So he's quite right to say that while we protect domestic consumers in the way I've outlined, it's a fair thing to raise the issue of industrial users of energy in business. He will also know that we have schemes that protect industrial users of energy. We've got the Energy Industry Incentive Scheme. We also have launched, in fact, yesterday, a new tranche of the Industrial Energy Transformation Fund, up to £220 million, where businesses can bid in for further support in that way.
Jacob, yeah.
Thank the Secretary of State for his tireless work over the last few weeks, not just on the gas price crisis, but also on the CO2 shortage that followed. And I'd also like to pay tribute to CF Fertilisers, who came back online in Stockton, and to Ensis in Redcar for offering to help and come online too. But for people across Redcar and Cleveland, can the Secretary of State outline how we're supporting people and protecting them from these high prices?
My honourable friend makes an excellent point. The CO2 crisis or question at hand, we dealt with immediately. I spoke to the CEO of CFF twice, on Sunday and Monday, and we had a solution on Tuesday. And I'm very pleased that as a consequence of that solution, they've managed to get production up and running, and also getting people back to work in that plant. He will know, after my many visits to Teesside, speaking to Ben Houchin, this government is resolutely focused on helping his constituents level up and get well-paid, well-secured jobs.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. These skyrocketing gas prices will have a devastating impact, not just on the public, but on businesses. and they will eventually have to pass those rises back onto the public. Does he understand that that particular double whammy for the public will see even more families being pushed into fuel poverty and consequently also into food poverty? Apart from cutting universal credit very soon, making it even worse for many of these families, what's he doing to support them?
Said repeatedly, and he will have seen reports that energy companies want the government to lift the energy price cap. I've repeatedly resisted that. I've very explicitly said on the floor of this House and in other places that the energy price cap stays, while also reaffirming our commitment to the warm home discount and the winter fuel payment. We are absolutely focused on keeping consumers' prices as low as possible in the energy market.
Speaker, we all hear about the number of businesses that are going bust at the moment in this market, but could you assure me that, and my constituents in Sedgefield, that as we go forward, we anticipate this to be a short-term shock and we will still come out of this with a robust market with plenty of diversity of supply?
My honourable friend knows that competition is the key to this market. We had a world which was oligopolistic in this respect. We've introduced the price cap. We've had lots of entrants, small, nimble entrants come in, driving innovation and a dynamic system. And I'm absolutely committed to having a competitive market. And I'm sure that after this process, we will still have a vibrant and dynamic energy system.
Question 5.
Very much, Mr. Speaker. There's too many people who have got to watch every single penny these days and have to worry about where all of their bills and money is going to come from. Would the Secretary of State have a look at the amount of time that it takes a supplier of last resort to provide people with an accurate forecast for their energy costs, and if possible, try and reduce the length of time that they spend it with that uncertainty?
I'd be very happy, as the honourable lady, to look at that. As I've said many times, I'm in contact with Mr. Brearley, the CEO of Ofgem, on practically a daily basis now. And that's something absolutely that I can raise with him in our next meeting.
Drew Bridgen.
Can I draw the House's attention to my entry in the register of members' interest that I own shares in companies that invest in renewable energy. As the House will know, that consumer energy bills are enhanced by climate change levy charges, which are used to support renewable energy producers. However, is my right honourable friend aware that a large number of these renewable energy producers use special purpose vehicle companies to receive these subsidies, and many of these SPVs are actually based offshore for tax? Would my right honourable friend agree to meet with me to discuss this issue and how the government can close this very clear tax loophole?
Secretary.
Honourable friend knows I'm always prepared to meet him at any time to discuss any matter he chooses to discuss with me.
Dame Diana Jones.
Mr. Speaker. Would the minister still advise consumers to change their energy suppliers, or would they just be better off changing their government?
Well, I think they had a chance to change their government, and as I recall, it didn't end so well for the party opposite. But that maybe my memory fails me. But we have a dynamic, vibrant, and competitive market, and I think consumers should have the choice in order to keep their costs low.
Stephen Metcalfe.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Obviously, this is a concerning time for constituents, so of course I welcome the actions that the government's taking. Can my right honourable friend therefore confirm that whatever happens in the market, no one in Basildon or Thurrock need fear supply failure this winter or sudden hikes in prices?
No one in Basildon and Thurrock or anywhere else in this country will fear the eventuality that he describes. As I've said, the solar process is absolutely focused on making sure that customers have continuity of supply. That's a top priority.
Claire Anderson.
Better insulation of homes is essential for cutting rising fuel bills and for cutting emissions. Will the Secretary of State agree that it was a mistake to cut the Green Homes Grant earlier this year, and would he commit to reforming and bringing it back?
As I've said a number of times in my previous role and in this role, the Green Homes Grant did three things, or attempted to do three things. The first was decarbonise public sector buildings. That worked very effectively through Salix, the bank that disbursed those funds. The second element, which was dispersed by the local authorities, has worked very well. The third element we closed, and we want to get a renewed version of it.
Lynn Saxby.
Thank you,
Speaker, under the final days of the last Labour government, the UK was near the bottom of G20 league tables for green investment and renewable energy. Can I therefore congratulate my right honourable friend for his department's achievements in offshore and floating wind? And can my right honourable friend confirm that his department will continue to invest in this area, particularly close to my North Devon constituency in the Celtic Sea?
Absolutely. My honourable friend will know that as far as the Celtic Sea is concerned, we have really exciting floating offshore wind projects, which I'm very pleased to see being developed. And she's also right to observe that during the last Labour government, we did absolutely nothing whatsoever to ensure security of energy supply or its diversity.
Jack Jeremy.
Mr. Speaker, an Erdington care worker with 2 children, close to tears, said to me, "I worked so hard throughout the COVID crisis. Now I'm facing my universal credit being cut, a tax increase and soaring energy bills." She said, "Jack, why are they going ahead with the cut to universal credit? Do they begin to understand," her words, "do they begin to understand how difficult life is for people like me?" Is she wrong?
I think that the massive increase in energy prices is something which is of a global effect. I completely understand that people are facing issues this winter that were not foreseen maybe 6 months ago. But what I am prepared to say is that this government has rigorously focused on protecting the most vulnerable customers in the energy market, and we're absolutely focused on getting Britain back to work. And that is why our unemployment rate is one of the lowest in the G7, 4.7%, and in France, it's at 8%. We're creating jobs and we're keeping the economy going.
Baker.
Well, no, I've been somewhat of a dowdy champion in North Norfolk for the offshore energy grid. And he's smiling and knows what I'm going to say next. Would he work at speed to ensure that the offshore network grid will be implemented as soon as it possibly can to ensure that we stop this dereliction of the countryside with the offshore cable corridors?
There is nobody in this House who has been so consistent and focused on this issue than my honourable friend. And he knows that as Energy Minister, I commissioned the Offshore Transmission Network Review, and we've really accelerated work in this regard. And I'm very, very happy to speak to him and other colleagues on progress in this respect.
Shelby.
Secretary of State describes small energy companies like Green in Newcastle Central as failures and says nothing of his own failure in structuring, regulating and shaping the energy market. So can he confirm to me now that the large energy companies like Green, the large energy companies will not receive 1 penny of taxpayers' money? And what support will he offer to the employees of Green, apart from slashing universal credit?
So, as I've said, it's a consistent feature of this market among the last few years that energy companies have exited the market. They've failed. They've left the market. And this is something where we have a process, the supply of last resort, to deal with. In terms of subsidies or grants to larger companies, I can categorically say to this House, we will not be giving any grants or subsidies for larger companies.
Bert Davies.
Speaker, can I welcome the government's market-led approach on this? The CBI have been very clear in saying that Labour's plans to renationalise our UK energy network would result in higher household bills. Does my right honourable friend agree that this could also threaten UK energy supplies?
I think any Labour plan to nationalise the industry would be a step back into the dark ages, frankly, and would be a disaster for this country's reputation as a hub of international capital and investment.
Rachel Muskell.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The rise in energy prices will disproportionately impact people living in the north because it is colder during the winter in the north. So what assessment has he made of the regional disparities and how is he going to mitigate against that?
I think the honourable lady raises a very fair point. And clearly, in terms of the gas price, the single most important determinant of it is the weather. And she's absolutely right. That's why we've got schemes like the warm home discount. And that's why we're absolutely focused on protecting the most vulnerable customers, wherever they are in the UK.
Tricia Gibson.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. 500,000 more people are likely to fall into fuel poverty as a result of this gas crisis. With record increases in inflation, plans to cut universal credit, which will hit 37% of Scottish families, supermarket shelves more empty by the day, and an aggressive national insurance tax hike hitting those on the lowest pay hardest. Can the Secretary of State tell us what has gone so wrong as we face a winter of discontent? And can he explain why anyone should have confidence in this government?
Tell the Honourable Lady why we should have confidence in this government. We have done a vaccine rollout, which has been the envy of the world. We've got the economy back up and running. We've got a 4.7% unemployment, which is amongst the lowest in the G7. And we've navigated the storms of COVID-19 pretty effectively.
Laura Furrier.
That my constituents were victims of the Green Deal mis-selling scandal and have been left saddled with tens of thousands of pounds of debt for a scheme they thought was publicly funded and government-backed and was supposed to lower their energy bills. Now, on top of having to repay this debt, their bill is set to skyrocket. And supporting a constituent that's only recently discovered she was a victim when trying to sell a home, I was informed that the Secretary of State has no obligation to investigate cases over 6 years old. Many victims of this scam won't have been aware immediately, so can the Secretary of State explain what recourse exists for victims who come forward later on?
So we've been dealing with the cases of on the Green Deal, the Green Deal issue on a case-by-case basis. I haven't been informed about the specific details that the Honourable Lady describes, but I'd be very happy to meet with her and along with my officials to discuss the particulars of this individual case.
Jim Sharman.
I thank the Secretary of State for his replies to all the answers. This is what could be termed almost a perfect storm. Gas has risen due to the scheduled maintenance projects rescheduled from 2021 because of the pandemic. The lower than usual gas supply from Russia, less liquefied natural gas reaching Europe.
A statement on the impact of coronavirus on attendance and education settings and support for pupils to catch up on lost learning.
Mr. Speaker, I'm terribly grateful to you for granting this urgent question during my first week in the job. We would all like to thank school staff for their ongoing dedication to pupils at what has obviously been an extremely difficult time. Regular school attendance is absolutely vital for children's education, well-being and long-term development. I'm pleased to report that attendance last week was higher than at the same time last year, with 91.9% of students attending and 99.9% of all state-funded schools open. We know the impact of coronavirus has been felt strongly in schools. The evidence is clear that being out of education causes significant harm to attainment, life chances, mental health, and physical health. Data from the autumn 2020 school census showed that 60% of pupils had some period where they did not attend school in circumstances relating to COVID-19 during the autumn term. This represents 33 million days missed. An analysis shows that every day of education missed matters. That's why this government is rightly focused on reducing the disruption to education. We have put an end to the self-isolation of whole bubbles. Under 18s no longer need to self-isolate after contact with a positive case. Secondary pupils were tested on their return to help limit transmission and will continue to test this term. And just last week, this government announced the rollout of vaccinations for all 12 to 15-year-olds. Our communications programme has promoted the importance of attendance, and we continue to monitor the data closely. We're also fully committed to helping pupils catch up. Our £3 billion investment in recovery includes over £950 million for schools to best support the most affected children. And this will have a material impact in closing gaps that have emerged. We continue to work closely with local authorities and schools to help them re-engage pupils. The government's Supporting Families programme continues to work with families where attendance is a significant concern, and we're providing support to tackle mental health issues, which will improve attendance further. This includes £7 million for local authorities to deliver the Wellbeing for Education Recovery programme, and £9.5 million to train senior mental health leads in up to 7,800 schools and colleges. We're also recruiting, Mr. Speaker, a team of expert attendance advisors to work with local authorities to help them improve their services and improve the consistency and quality of their attendance interventions.
The next stage includes a review of time spent in school and 16 to 19 education and the impact that this could have on helping children and young people to catch up. And to support and re-engage the most at-risk pupils, we are investing £45 million for the new SAFE and AP task forces, bringing together specialist support in schools and AP settings in serious violence hotspots. We're also joining up support by expanding the role of virtual school heads, a wonderful initiative, to cover all children with a social worker to provide additional support on attendance and attainment for many of the most vulnerable pupils. The impact of the pandemic has been significant, and this government continues to act tirelessly to help our children recover their education and well-being with the help of our excellent teaching profession.
Kate Green.
Thank you for granting this urgent question, Mr. Speaker. And while I'm very sorry that the Secretary of State is not in his place, I warmly congratulate the Minister on his appointment. I know he'll agree with me that nothing is more important than our children's futures. But during the pandemic, the government has treated children and young people as an afterthought, failing to take the action teachers, parents, pupils and the Labour Party have been calling for to keep children in school. 122,000 children were out of school last week. Yesterday, the Chief Medical Officer warned that COVID is spreading fastest in secondary age pupils. When will the government act to improve ventilation in schools, colleges and universities? Can the Minister explain the government's rationale on masks, which saw them required in schools in March, but not now, when COVID rates are over 400 times higher? We welcome the advice of the Chief Medical Officers to roll out the vaccine to 12 to 15-year-olds, but already there are reports of pressure on school nursing services. Can he guarantee all first doses will have been administered by October half-term? And shockingly, there are reports that some schools are experiencing anti-vaccination protests. What action is being taken to ensure no school faces threats and intimidation? Mr. Speaker, in Education Orals on the 6th of September, the then Secretary of State hinted that the government may cease recommending twice-weekly home testing at the end of this month, even though COVID continues to spread. Can the Minister reconfirm the plans on testing, and how will he ensure testing at home is carried out after the drop-off we saw last year? And even before this latest surge in absences, children had already missed an average of 115 days of school. The Conservatives' paltry recovery plan comes nowhere close to tackling what's needed. Labour's plan commits to extending the school day to give time for breakfast clubs and new activities, small group tutoring, expert mental health and training for our world-class school staff. Will the Minister commit today to matching Labour's ambition?
Minister.
Well, I thank the right honourable lady for this urgent question and for her opening remarks. Look, well, whilst I'm sure we won't always see eye to eye, I know that we both have a great concern for children in this country, and I look forward to working with her on that score. But I also don't really want to take too many lectures from the Labour Party on this subject. And I think we all remember very clearly last year when they consistently refused to say that schools were safe for children to go back. I have to say as well that the challenges that we're facing at the moment are obviously substantial, but great improvements have been made. At the end of last term, attendance in school was at 75%. As of Thursday last week, it was 91.9%, with 99.9% of all schools open. And that is a tribute to the very hard work that our health service has done and the very hard work that's being done in schools at the moment. And I'm sure the whole House will pay tribute to that work. Look, in our department, we have an absolute determination to be led by the best evidence. And I know that obviously that is shared across government. And I think there's probably no one in government. Obviously when the evidence changes, changes and the situation changes, so we change our policies. So the Right Honourable Lady asked about face masks. Yes, obviously, at some stages in the pandemic, we've had face masks in corridors, and we've had very strict social distancing, and we've had bubbles. But the evidence now says that we can move away from that, and it's much to the good, because anyone who's ever worked in schools, as I have, Mr. Speaker, will tell you that it's very difficult to conduct proper education when children have their faces covered. So I strongly welcome the fact we've been able to make a change on that score. And we have been able, over the course of the pandemic, to put £3 billion into helping schools and education recover, including £1.5 billion on evidence-based tutoring programmes, which are going to help children catch up, including the most vulnerable children. Mr. Speaker, I'm absolutely delighted to have discovered that we've got £220 million being spent for vulnerable children to attend holiday activities and food programmes in all local authorities. And for those children who have been suffering from the worst mental health problems, a dreadful problem, which I know many honourable members will have seen in their constituency surgeries. We have £79 million to support those children, £17 million for training for mental health and well-being in schools. The Right Honourable Lady also asks, quite rightly, about the dreadful anti-vaccination protests that we've seen, and these are totally unacceptable. The level of intimidation being put on schools and on teachers is abhorrent, and I make absolutely clear to any head teachers and teachers watching, contrary to some of the things you've been told, legal liability does not rest with schools. It does not rest with schools at all. It rests with the health service and those providing vaccinations. So thank you very much. I'd like to thank schools very much for the spaces they've created and the consent forms they've provided. But rest assured, it's the health service that's providing these jabs and offering the support. And I think I'd be grateful if any school who was facing intimidation let the department know about it so that we can follow it up. Mr. Speaker, this is a difficult time for education, but things are getting better. They're getting better because of the actions that this government has taken to roll out one of the best vaccine programs in the world and to support children and their teachers in school.
Select Committee, Robert Holton.
See my honourable friend and constituency neighbour in this place. As I understand it from our discussion with the Chief Medical Officer at Select Committee yesterday and from the government, the whole purpose of the vaccination programme, or the key purpose, is to keep our children in school. I've been sent a letter, however, by parents about the Teddington School in Middlesex run by Bourne Educational Trust that shows that all students will be sent home on Friday the 24th of September after the day of vaccinations today. So despite government guidance, there are examples of schools doing this, or whole year groups grounded at home, or even closing down completely. So will my right honourable friend make sure that schools follow the government guidance to the letter, don't send children home unless they have COVID, ring the head teachers himself to make sure we keep our children learning? And will he also ensure, in terms of the catch-up fund, that it reaches the poorest and most disadvantaged students, because we know that only 44% of students receiving the pupil premium are being missed, and there are huge regional disparities as well.
Well, look, I thank my right honourable friend for his question, and I look forward to working with him in his role as chair of the Education Select Committee, and as a venerable defender of the needs of the children and voters of Harlow. Absolutely, it's extremely important that schools follow departmental guidance, and I'm sure that my officials will have heard the example that he's just given. But the message is clear. The best place for children is in schools, and there are very clear criteria that tell us when children should be.
Stella Creasy.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The Minister rightly recognises the toll on the mental health of children in this school of this country of the last year. In Waltham Forest, many schools dug deep and paid for external counselling services for the children. they're now facing big gaps in their budget. So will the Minister commit today, having said how important it is to no school in this country being out of pocket and being fully reimbursed for the cost of counselling over the last 18 months to help our children get through the pandemic?
Minister.
Well, I thank the honourable lady for her question, and I also, thank her school, the school and her constituency for the work they've done to look after their pupils. Sounds like they've gone above and beyond. As I said in my answer to the right honourable lady a few moments ago, the department is and has invested considerable amounts of money in supporting children's mental health. 79 million pounds across the piece, with 17 million pounds for training for mental health and well-being in schools. And we're fully aware that this is one of the lasting consequences of the pandemic, and that we're going to have to step in and support schools every step of the way.